do you think, Alex? Should we maybe get started, you think?
Yeah, we can start with introductions and people will just filter in. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Good morning, or maybe afternoon, or some other time, wherever you're joining in from. And thanks for coming in the middle of the day during your busy schedules. We're really excited to kick off this first of a series in landscape processes, lunchtime series plus one evening during that. My name is Derek Hefferlin. I am the chair of landscape architecture and urban design programs here at the Setbacks School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. I think a lot of you on this call already maybe know me, but I want to make sure to do the introductions. And what's exciting about this, Alex Mei, who is on faculty here now and also practicing, as you will see very closely with our two guests today, is an alum of our undergraduate program and then went on to do her graduate studies at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where I'll keep this brief, but she went on to win several awards and fellowships and has already been published. And we're really excited to have her on faculty here. And this spring, she's pulling quite a heavy load in teaching 3 classes, and 2 of which, landscape technology and her materials class, Rethinking Design Standards, have kind of spun into this idea that she and I talked about of doing this lunchtime series. And so Alex has really shouldered the responsibility and taken this head on, and we're really excited to have these 6 talks in the coming weeks. So I will pass it over to Alex and she can introduce our guests and the topic for today.
Thanks, Derek. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. We're really excited to have you all here and to start this series with Nina and Chris's talk today. So as Derek mentioned, I'm a lecturer at WashU in architecture and landscape architecture. And I also work for Merritt Chase. So I'm really excited to have both of our guests here today. So before I introduce them, I just wanted to note a couple of logistics. So firstly, as Derek mentioned, today's talk is part of a series titled Landscape Processes, which is enabled by the support of the Master of Landscape Architecture program. And after our conversation today with Nina and Chris, the upcoming events in the series will include presentations by Alexa von Brainerd, Diana Fernandez, Neil Kirkwood, Kachvora and Pamela Conrad. I'm going to try and post a link in the chat where you can sign up for all of the other wonderful talks on the Sandfox School website. So this session is also being recorded for us to share with those who cannot make it today. And throughout the presentation and after, you can submit questions for Nina and Chris in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Derek and I will sort through your questions for a moderated discussion following their presentation. And then lastly, thanks to our partnership with the ASLA St. Louis chapter, we are able to provide 1 free LACES approved credit for those attending today. So if you would like to earn this credit, you can fill out the following Google form and we'll take down your information. I'm going to also post this link in the chat. And let me know if you have any questions about that. So without further delay, I will introduce both Nina and Chris. So Nina Chase is a founding principal of Merritt Chase. As a registered landscape architect, she works to position public spaces as a foundational building blocks of communities. Born and raised in West Virginia, Nina is a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Design and West Virginia University. Her work has received national recognition from the ASLA, the Landscape Architecture Foundation, and the Architectural League of New York. She is a former adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon School of Architecture and an emeritus board member of the Landscape Architecture Foundation. Currently, Nina is a member of the City of Pittsburgh's Contextual Design Advisory Committee and the vice president of the Lawrenceville Corporation's Board of Directors. So Chris Merritt is a landscape architect and founding principal of Merritt Chase. His work focuses on the design of culturally significant public spaces in complex social, ecological, and infrastructural contexts. His previous project experiences with Sasaki range from urban design master plans to detailed site designs. His clients include public agencies, communities, institutions, and private developers. Chris's work has been recognized with awards from the Urban Land Institute, the ASLA, the AIA, and the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He is a graduate of the Harvard GSD and Purdue University and currently serves on the curatorial advisory committee for Exhibit Columbus. So with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Hi, everybody out there. Good to see you all. Chris is going to be sharing his screen. So does everybody see it? Looks good. Well, thank you for joining today, and thank you, a special thank you to Alexandra and Derek and the department for the invitation to be here with you. We're excited. We actually just were in Alexandra's materials technology class presenting a little bit deeper dive into some of our built work, which was fun, and so we're excited to share a little bit more broadly some of our planning work today. I did just want to say that in many ways, being able to connect so easily to students virtually over the last year has been a real bright spot for us in an otherwise very challenging year, as we all know. And we often talk in our office about how designers and we're landscape architects, how we're kind of eternal optimists, and we have to be because our job is really to envision and realize futures that don't exist yet. The pandemic has really made us all very aware that it's hard to dedicate time to plan for futures when everyone's day-to-day is really spent on immediate risks. And so as designers, I think we have an incredible responsibility and privilege to spend our time doing this and to use the tools at our disposal to offer optimism, especially today. So we just wanted to say thank you to you all and WashU for giving a platform for that optimism and hope today. For our presentation, we wanted to spend some time introducing our firm to you, just doing kind of a high-level intro initially, and then diving deeper into a couple projects, highlighting a few of our ongoing projects and partnerships, and then we can use the rest of the time for Q&A at the end. And feel free to add questions in the chat or the Q&A, as Alexandra mentioned, throughout. We're excited to talk more with you after. So Chris and I are the founding partners of Merritt Chase. We're an emerging landscape architecture and urban design practice. We founded the firm in 2017, so we're just a couple years old. We are based in the Midwest, and we have deep local roots here in the Midwest. Chris and I met while working at Sasaki Associates in Boston, and quickly realized that we had very complementary skill sets and shared a desire to start a practice with a focus in our home regional landscapes. Chris is from the Indianapolis area where he's based. And as was mentioned, he's a Purdue grad, and I am from West Virginia, and I'm based in Pittsburgh area today. And I think actually, if you go back up to the slide before, we just wanted to introduce everybody who's on our team now. We're an intentionally small team. We're five strong, myself and Chris and Alexandra and Nick Steinkraust and Terry Brightman, who I think are all on the presentation call today. We are collectively, we're landscape architects, but we're also urban designers and trained as urban designers to think about public space and on projects, not only at a master planning scale, but also all the way down to the site scale. So we do work as landscape architects from concept design all the way through construction, in addition to doing master planning work at an urban design scale. And so on any given day, we're kind of working at both of those scales, thinking big and small at the same time. Next slide. So we are committed to the Midwest. As I mentioned, Chris and I started the practice really with an intention of working with the people and the places that we identify with most, our home regional landscapes. And as such, our work kind of spans Indianapolis and Pittsburgh and the cities in between in the Midwest and also in Appalachia, which Pittsburgh kind of straddles the border between. And our work, the goal in our work is to plan and design meaningful and memorable landscapes. And we do that because we know that there's really power in the public open spaces of a community. And I think all of us, and we were talking about this in the class before, that we know that good public space really provides the opportunity for diversity of communities to belong and feel welcome and interact. And it's what it's through those public spaces of our neighborhoods and our cities and even our campuses that that's what connects us to each other and our communities. And all of the work we do, I think next slide. And go to the next slide. The way we do this work, oh no, that's okay. A little bit of a lag. The types of work that we do is pretty typical of a landscape architecture firm, kind of in service to those goals to design meaningful, memorable spaces. We work at the scale of a garden. We do streetscape projects. We design plazas, trail systems, parks, campuses, and all of those being with the ultimate goal of building permanent landscapes in communities. And we also like to layer in lots of different components into our projects, history, culture, ecology, and identity to really uncover meaning through a process and create those memorable places. And our work also takes a critical look at the traditional design process. So typically in a design process, you do planning work and then you do built work and it kind of goes round and round in a circle. Sometimes you do the plan and it sits on a shelf, or sometimes you build something and it's not quite exactly what is necessary or needs and kind of falls into disrepair. And we've taken a critical look at that. And we like to say that we're not only designers of the final built project, but more importantly, designers of the entire process. And we like to think of the process as the design project itself. And so we design a unique process for every project that kind of expands upon the plan and build process to include many different points of contact and places where we as landscape architects can offer a design process to create those meaningful and memorable places. So for every project, we start with engagement in a variety of ways, and we're going to show that in a couple of the projects that we've pulled together for today. We do planning work kind of in the most traditional sense, but then we also do phasing and testing with short-term projects, which leads to the building that then leads to activation. And then through that activation, it's kind of a continued engagement process, and that cycle continues. And it's really through that process as a full process with all of those stages that true transformation of place that's inclusive for everyone is possible. And so as we just showed, we do the planning and the building, but we also do integrate really strategic phasing strategies into our projects that utilize more short-term temporary projects to test and confirm project goals. So the project on the left, we're going to dive into a little bit more detail, but that project was built out of duct tape and milk crates and was a 6-day pop-up project. And we use those temporary projects as a way to test ideas before we invest in a final long-term permanent landscape, more like the image on the right, which is a campus project. And our partnerships and our projects with all of our clients really begin with listening in many forms, and you'll see that in a variety of our projects that we'll show. And then ultimately, that process of listening and building and planning becomes an iterative process that includes activation at the end, and through activation, continued observation and eventual change of a landscape over time.
So we're going to share just a handful of projects, either recently completed or projects that we're currently working on that I think touch on some of those themes. This was Nina and I's first project, starting the firm, Bow Market in Somerville. It's a kind of 40 plus food, art, and retail vendor market that has this kind of second floor that creates this theater in the round environment over this public courtyard. When we first came to the project, it looked like this. It's a 2-story kind of cinder block storage warehouse. And working with a developer, they had this vision that each of these storage bays could become a small square footage kind of space for often first time brick and mortar vendors. And so it looks like this today with each one of these as a kind of different vendor. It's a really diverse kind of eclectic mix of folks, all focused around this open, flexible public courtyard. Research into materiality to reflect some of the identity of the region and the building was really important to us. So through this process, we identified some reclaimed granite that we could utilize that was coming off of the Longfellow Bridge that was being restored across the Charles River. And then these kind of large reclaimed beams that came out of a warehouse just south of Boston that we started to assemble together in different ways across the market. This is actually the courtyard for the brewery that's there. You can see a mural that we worked with an artist on to put in, but creating this kind of stepped reclaimed seat element on the edge. This is what Bow Market kind of looks like. It's a pretty funky building in the middle of a block. And so we were working to figure out how you could provide a kind of subtle entry all the way to Somerville Avenue that would bring you in to this environment where you have the open courtyard and kind of the main part, and then the brewery beer garden. Programming and activation was really important for this project. So thinking about the kind of everyday experience, large events with tents that might come in, and the kind of regular reoccurring markets that could be set up. It's a great social media feed to follow. The amount of just kind of life and activation that happens here is incredible. And so, thinking about how to design a space to allow for that kind of flexibility was something that was really important for the project to support the kind of everyday use of, families or neighbors coming over to have lunch, in addition to the kind of larger programmed events and festivals. Over the past year, it's also been amazing to watch how this place has adapted to COVID and still provide a kind of successful and vibrant market despite the pandemic and the times we're in. We've been working in Cleveland with in the Midtown neighborhood on a public realm connectivity plan with the neighborhood organization, Cleveland Foundation, and a historic house museum. This is in the context of a new developing innovation district between University Circle and downtown Cleveland within the Huff neighborhood. So a historic African-American neighborhood where we've been kind of aligning and thinking about all of these different projects coming together, all kind of focused on the public realm. We've all, of course, gotten used to Zoom, and so we've really gotten to kind of experiment and learn with the community about ways that can be effective, still showing up kind of outside of grocery stores and inside the barn at the museum to do more kind of typical in-person engagement. As well as hosting a kind of performance and drive-in style master plan presentation for the museum. This is what the museum itself looks like today. Again, it's a historic house museum that was built in the 1820s. Has a series of kind of lush, beautiful gardens that still exist today, but is otherwise a kind of leftover farm that hasn't been touched for a while. And so we've been imagining ways to kind of reinterpret their grounds in the context of the projects that are happening. And working for a historic institution, we've been thinking a lot about the identity, not just of the institution, but the neighborhood and the city and the region at large, as the museum has this new vision to kind of broaden their audience and their programming. So the stories that they can tell can start to reflect the identity of the neighborhood that they're in. And so thinking about that timeline of the museum kind of being present through urban renewal in the neighborhood and starting to tell that story. This is what the district looks like today. And so starting the project, starting to imagine what an open space network would look like to connect these various elements that we'll be developing in the district, the character and scale of these open spaces and how they might all connect in a final landscape master plan. And then working a little more closely with the museum on their campus master plan that we're finishing this spring, and coordinating that as these new development projects kind of come online and really start to change the identity of who this institution is, while still maintaining kind of the character of the museum itself. And so an image of what that might look like with a renewed campus and some additional building program.
We also wanted to share some work we're doing in Morgantown, West Virginia, which also happens to be my hometown, just south of Pittsburgh. This is a riverfront project that is a renovation of an existing riverfront that was built in the 90s, but had fallen into disrepair. And I was originally involved in this project a few years before our firm became officially involved as working for a nonprofit in Pittsburgh called River Life. And as a landscape architect, this was really exciting because this was pre kind of official project kickoff. I, as a landscape architect, was involved in very early phases of this project to help set up a framework for thinking about not only this project as a riverfront project, but how it fits into a larger network of open spaces along the riverfront in Morgantown. And I think to the point of this lecture series being about landscape processes, maybe not just in construction and implementation, but thinking about our role as landscape architects and practitioners and being as involved as we can further upstream in development processes to help set the stage for improvements to our landscapes in the future. And so this project was really rewarding because we were involved early on. We were able to do some very early renderings to generate ideas and momentum for the project, and ultimately secure almost double the funding so that the project could encompass a larger landscape and improve a larger swath of the riverfront in Morgantown. This is what the riverfront looked like a number of years ago. There's the riverfront on the left. There was an amphitheater. You can see those kind of railings leading down to an amphitheater. The bridge in the distance is a bridge that divides between two parts of the riverfront that you'll see here in a second. And then the building on the right is a historic train depot that had been turned into a bus terminal and now has been renovated for community space and a cafe and a whole new kind of facility for the downtown neighborhood. The space has been completely rehabilitated, and we were the landscape architects working with architects on the building renovations, including a new shade structure on the left, a restroom building in the back of this plaza that now sits between the renovated depot building and the amphitheater. But it was really the process for this project that was pretty unique and spanned a large period of time and involved lots of different conversations that allowed us as landscape architects to really get this project right for everyone involved. And it started with boat tours. As you can see on the right, we had community engagement work sessions, we had design sessions on smaller pieces of the park, but really kind of vetting lots of different options and lots of feedback from all the stakeholders who've been working to improve the riverfront in Morgantown for a number of years. And this included just volunteers, residents, other nonprofit organizations, West Virginia University, City Council, and the engineering staff for the city, and then River Life kind of leading that, and then ultimately the city putting out an RFP for hiring landscape architect and team to implement the work which we were hired to do. So we worked, initially the scope was just to renovate the Ruby Amphitheater, which you can see kind of in the center of the screen, and the depot and the plaza between. But it was really through this collaborative, iterative engagement process that the scale and scope of this project expanded all the way from the right to the left of this project to include the amphitheater, landscape improvements all across the riverfront, and then what is also called Walnut Street Landing on the left-hand side of the screen to include a new boat launch, accessible kayak launch, and connections back into downtown Morgantown. And you can see the result of that work here. This is kind of the improved riparian edge and the shade structure off in the distance on the left-hand side, and some new furniture and walks that we designed to be fully accessible without railings and in kind of interruptions to the landscape. The depot landscape here, renovations to the trail, all new site furniture, this new shade structure, and improvements to the amphitheater, which has now been opened last summer. They haven't had too many events yet, given the current conditions with COVID, but hopefully this summer that they'll be able to really program this. The other really exciting part of this project, in addition to the physical improvements, was an investment from the funder, which was the Hazel Ruby McQueen Charitable Trust, who had originally invested in the Riverfront in its first iteration and has continued to do so. They gave money for the landscape improvements. They also gave money to hire a staff person within the city to run the programming strategy. So there is now someone whose full-time job it is to organize concerts, organize family events, have races and runs and things on the trail, and really bringing people to the riverfront. And in a lot of our work, as I've mentioned, that activation component of our design process is so critical, because without that, you can design the most beautiful landscape, but if you don't have other people attracting people to these spaces, they can fall into disrepair, as happened here over the years. And so it was really wonderful to be able to have those conversations and advocate for not only the physical improvements, but the human capital and the cost to run these programs to activate the landscape. Here you can see the ADA kayak launch and the new boat launch, and then kind of the Walnut Street, which goes up into downtown as a main new connector into the downtown urban fabric. You also kind of get a sense of some of the industrial components of the old rail to trail, or the old railroad trestles, and the trail above, kind of at the higher elevation there. We also wanted to share Birch Street Plaza, which is a project we worked on with the city of Boston. Again, you know, our career roots are in the Boston area. And so we were able to, we had the ability to work on this project over the last few years with a couple folks in the city of Boston, and then the Rosendale Village Main Streets organization. But this project was pretty unique in that we were hired as the landscape architects to take take Birch Street, which you can see in this image, which is a short little one-way street in Rosendale, a neighborhood just south of downtown Boston, and transform it from a street for cars into a pedestrianized plaza for people. And so we were hired in kind of a traditional sense to do this. We created the imagery to do the before and after and kind of convince everybody that this was a great idea. But as part of our process and our pitch to the city, we said, what if we also took this a step further in terms of process and really test this idea of pedestrianizing this plaza using less expensive materials, and do a 6-day pop-up version of this plaza to gather immediate feedback from residents and stakeholders in and around the area. And so we designed with the Rosendale Village Main Streets and the businesses that align the street this kind of pop-up temporary version of the plaza made out of duct tape and milk crates. And we were able to replicate all the design elements that we were proposing for the future using these inexpensive materials to create essentially this one-to-one scale model that we were able to get, kind of watch how people used. And as designers, we were able to kind of gut check, you know, positions and locations of things, but essentially help build momentum for the future of this project. So you can see here that kind of transformation where we have the paving pattern on the ground, replicated with duct tape, the benches replicated with the milk crates, and then trees. We were using these wooden dowels to kind of represent the design concept, which is for a birch forest on the street. And this is kind of the nice overhead shot of the whole space here with the street closed. As I mentioned, it was nice for us just to see scale and kind of arrangement of elements, but it was also a wonderful way to understand programming and activation and test kind of different versions of activation. And so we developed a full week's worth of calendar events. So we had, on the left, you can see a single person playing guitar, or kind of more casual Friday night activity. And then on the right, a Saturday market that had tents and stalls and different vendors come out. And so we wanted to make sure there was enough space for all of that to happen. We were also able in real time to get feedback from folks who ultimately had the sign off on this project. So the city councilor on the right here. We also had the fire chief come down and look at some of the widths and understand that this was okay to do. We had the Public Improvement Commission chair come down and check out the project and really be able to build capacity for this project in real time so that the permitting actually took a lot less time than it typically would, because we were able to show, not just tell these stakeholders what we were planning to do. Throughout the project, we also got a ton of wonderful feedback through a variety of methods. We did intercept surveys where we were asking people in real time how they were feeling in the space, what they liked about it, what they'd like to see improved. We did observational surveys where we watched how people use the space. We invited emailed feedback, and then we also distributed feedback cards throughout the neighborhood to the businesses surrounding Burr Street so that they could talk to their customers and neighbors about what was happening on their street and get feedback directly from folks. And then ultimately we were able to take all that feedback and weave it into the final design of the more permanent version of this plaza, which is going to be constructed this spring and summer. And you can see there have been kind of updates to the paving patterns, some color ideas around added color, and being able to take all that feedback from the pop-up version into the final form that the plaza will take today.
So we've been working in Indianapolis on a project that, I think becomes more and more kind of relevant and rewarding for us in the moment that we're in. But with Eskenazi Health, the public hospital system in Indianapolis, who serves the city's most vulnerable population, at one of their clinics on the north side of the city, converting the property into a farm and kind of hybrid community park in the context of increased food pantry space and a new health and wellness center. They've partnered with a local nonprofit who is currently farming the property and brings all of the food into the pantry. And Eskenazi on their downtown campus has invested a lot and cares a lot about the environment that they're creating for their staff and patients, and believes in kind of design and the impact of design on better health outcomes. And so this is a map of food deserts in the city. So the green box there, it represents where our project is in the middle of a food desert in a place where 1 in 5 people are food insecure, including about 50,000 children. And in the last 15 years, the adult obesity rate rising from 15 to nearly 33%. Also in a time where we know public health and the social determinants of health is getting kind of more understanding. And so I think as designers and shapers of the built environment, having a bigger role and responsibility in doing some of this work. Also just understanding kind of who we're serving. We're volunteering at the food pantry itself to not only understand how logistically it works so we can better the design, but also understanding the lived experience of the people who go here. In addition to working on the farm itself and understanding kind of their needs and what would better kind of create an environment for not only this farm, but kind of other places where they're working as well. This is the site as it currently exists today. So in an environment where there's, it's really for cars. And so you get these kind of big box and large parking lots set back from the road. And so this is the kind of property that's currently being farmed. And we've designed this kind of farm where at the heart you get a series of gardens and the greenhouse and the new pantry and health and wellness center around the plaza, and then kind of farm and productive landscape around. And kind of core to the mission of the project was really rethinking the arrival experience of a patient. And creating a more welcoming environment and entry to the clinic. Again, thinking about process and just kind of our research and understanding local identity, understanding Indiana agriculture in this region, working with the farmer to understand seasonality and kind of what grows best and when, and kind of the positioning and layout of those things within the farm itself. As you can see here, adjacent to the greenhouse and a kind of farm patio that could be used as spill out for educational programming. And then on the other side, a connection to a sensory garden. So mental health was also a big priority in this project, and providing a space for patients and staff to come out within a garden environment. And then the plaza here at the pantry and health and wellness center itself. But again, what was really core to the mission of this project was providing a more kind of dignified experience for patients who are otherwise in a very vulnerable state, coming to a food pantry or you know, their primary care, and a patient population who's largely walking, biking, or taking the bus to this clinic, who's currently having to kind of navigate across broken parking lots and kind of abandoned field. And we've been working with the Eskenazi team to help kind of build out the story and actually fundraise kind of nationally for the project. So we'll stop there, open it up for any questions or comments, but just also want to thank you all for being here, and to Derek and Alexandra for the invitation.
Thank you both for your presentation. I just want to note for all the attendees, you can feel free to submit questions for Nina and Chris in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Maybe just to start with my own question, as we're kind of fielding some questions that are coming in, it's just, I think you guys touched on it a little bit, but how you determine the success of your projects. And I'm guessing it also varies between projects, but generally just how you think about the lifespan of your project going forward, and how you can start to measure, you know, what is a successful project, what is not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Chris, do you want to mention the Birch Street?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, so for Birch Street, we were just talking about this example of trying to measure success. And, you know, we have all these surveys and kind of data points that we look at to understand outcomes and impact. But there was one moment where we saw a family going to get ice cream. This little girl was just kind of laying out in the middle of the street with her ice cream on the duct tape. And it was just this moment, I think we realized that she would never do that in the middle of, you know, parallel parked cars. So that felt like a successful moment. But I think it goes back to maybe just ownership and pride and stewardship of a community on a space. And I think if we can help enhance and facilitate that, then, you know, that's successful. I think a lot of it is also just about, you know, and Nina touched kind of most on this, about our process, less the final outcome. But I think if we can kind of grow that capacity within a community to get to that point of kind of pride and ownership, then that's a measure of success. I think also just internally for us, there's a lot of language about, you know, not designing for, but with, and we, I think in some of our projects, try to become of the community. And if we can really develop those kind of trusted relationships where we're kind of welcomed in as part of the community, that's where our interest really lies. And I think why we're, you know, committed to practicing where we are and on the types of projects we are.
Thanks, Nina and Chris. That was really great. The beautiful work. And we're starting to get some good questions, lengthy questions coming in. So we'll dive into it. And one's from Alex's and my student from last semester, Nanchi Wang. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the Birch Street Plaza. The plaza is remodeled from a vehicular road, which increased place for people's activities, but decreased a line for public transportation at the same time. I wonder if you consider the transportation question while making the design decision. Does this transfer cause an extent of traffic congestion elsewhere? And how would you solve those potential traffic challenges if this would happen in the future when you design another road transfer plaza? So.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some of that was answered and kind of preceded our involvement on the project, where there was this, Birch Street is a very short little one-way street in the Roslindale neighborhood, and the business owners that surround it saw that it was kind of underutilized as a street. Like, people would use it mostly for parking, and people would cut through, but it was but there was a parking lot right nearby, and there wasn't really the need for the parking. It is next to a public transit stop, and so it is a big commuter route for people walking through, and they found through some early like one-day kind of street closure tests that it could work really well for pedestrian activity. And so the client team themselves was kind of experimenting with the idea of testing on a kind of micro scale. So then when we were hired and said, what if we took that idea and kind of expanded it and used it as an opportunity to test design ideas, it was really well accepted as a thought, because they'd already been kind of challenging this idea of using the street just for parking cars and minimal circulation. And so taking it out of the traffic kind of circulation route didn't have too much of an impact, because it was a pretty limited use road to begin with. And the city of Boston overall, this project was kind of building upon some initiatives across the city to take roads that are like that throughout the city. So other examples of smaller one-way roads that feel a little underutilized. They're looking at streets all across the city to turn them into plazas. And so this was one of the first pilot projects to do that. And they're kind of observing and watching how it unfolds over time. So it's really also for the city a test case in terms of kind of transitioning some of their property from car storage to people's focused space. But they're only doing it in key spots where they've kind of done the study of traffic and understand its impacts.
Cool. And then I'll just kind of keep going. It seems like we're getting some more, a lot of interest in Birch Street, and maybe combining a couple from a couple more students, Nick Orris and Ishan Zhang. The question about like how you incorporate prototyping, thinking of Birch Street in the duct tape, what was the process of design and spatial organization actually tested and decided upon? And then, how was it, Ishan adds, how was it tested? How do you decide on the texture? Reminds of other things like steel permeable frames. I had that question, like maybe you don't have to answer this because it might be proprietary, but how did you make it laid out? So, we shared that in the materials class, so we're happy to share. Maybe Chris, up those photos, because I think it'd be funny. Thank you for all these questions. Birch Street is a particularly fun project to talk about, so we're happy to talk as much about it. But it's funny because it is just duct tape. In terms of, so the first question was about, sorry, I'm like looking back at all the prototyping process. Yeah. So we initially, with the smaller stakeholder team of the businesses and the Roslindale Village Main Streets leadership, we came to them with a couple different design themes and concepts that we vetted with them, kind of shopped that around to the different business owners, and came up with this one design that we then basically did like a layout and materials plan for, using just the temporary materials, the duct tape and the milk crates, and did cost estimates and kind of takeoffs in terms of how much material we need to purchase. And then Chris tested a variety of types of duct tape at home, and just testing the durability of that material in space and making sure that it would actually work. We lucked out because the day that we installed it, it was a really beautiful dry day, and we were able to install it relatively easy. I say in quotes, as Alexandra reminded us, we got quite a workout. It took about 8 hours and about 8 to 10 volunteers over the course of those 8 hours to basically pave the street with duct tape. And it was one of the Roslindale Village Main Streets, I think he was an intern and he was an architecture student, who came up with this great strategy for how to actually lay it out. And using these, basically a little chunk of the duct tape as a spacer at key points. And then if you had 3 people, you could basically hold each of the ends and someone in the middle, and you'd put those down and then smooth it out. And it created the really clean lines. And it made a very relatively quick process of something that was pretty
could have been, well, was labor intensive, but could have been a little wonky, but this made it very straight and clean, which I think added to the success of what it looked like ultimately.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of maybe to zoom out a little bit and to talk more about the general practice. I think we can talk forever. We could have a whole nother lecture about Birch Street and just all of the work that went into.
No one ever wants to do anything but duct tape, so yeah.
Right.
And I got to ask, I know, I mean, real quick though, was that Alex in one of the pictures?
Yeah.
By Alex.
Yeah. That was like maybe a 10-hour day of laying down duct tape, doing squats. But maybe to zoom out, and there are some questions about just the the Merritt Chase firm. So someone asked, you mentioned your partnership as being inspired by your compatibility. Could you talk about your working dynamic, how one offsets the other's strengths and weaknesses, and how you define your roles in the practice?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, because the practice did start, I mean, and it's expanded now, we have the team of 5 and everybody has their individual kind of roles and skill sets and expertise. But the start of the firm was Chris and I for a number of years talking about starting a practice. And that was based off of having worked together at Sasaki. We sat next to each other, so there was kind of a proximity of just getting to know each other. But then working on specifically the research project together, where we realized we have similar goals in our projects and similar motivations to do great work, but we have very different ways of approaching that and different expertise and kind of skill sets, where I think a little bit and come to the table with more of the like big picture kind of urban design scale ideas, and had more experience of those types of projects at Sasaki doing master planning, but as a landscape architect. And then Chris having extensive experience on construction detailing, implementation, material quality, kind of layering in history and identity of a place into the physical landscape and the built environment. And those two skill sets being different enough from each other that they are complementary. We weren't trying to compete with each other in terms of every project. And it's a really nice way to kind of divvy up our work too, as we continue to get clients and expand and build out our practice. And then everyone on our team also has specific skill sets that allow us to continue to expand what we're able to offer, with none of us really like competing with each other in terms of what it is that we bring to the table, but all complementing each other and strengthening each other's core skills. And I would encourage that. I mean, just even if you're not starting a practice, but you're thinking about maybe building your group for a studio project, or going after a competition, or when you work at a firm and are working with others, seeking out people who you can constantly learn from, and maybe they don't do work exactly how you might do it, but the fact that they're doing it differently allows you learn something from them and they're learning something from you. And I think that too is something in our office. We're constantly trying to challenge ideas around things and learn from each other, so that it doesn't become stale or stagnant. And I think you can do the same in school, and then as you go into the workforce, thinking about what types of teams you want to work with, and who you're working. Also from a leadership standpoint, leadership styles that work for you.
Sorry, I think my internet is starting to cut out here. But to build on what you were saying, Katie from our program also had a question just about starting your guys' own firm, and what it takes in terms of overhead costs, as well as how to gain clients initially, and kind of if you could speak to just the beginning stages of that.
Yeah. Chris, do you want me to? I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I also.
No, go for it.
Okay, so one of the things that we did early on, just from a pure overhead standpoint, was that Chris and I were working remotely with each other pre-pandemic, and still today, because COVID, we all work remotely. And so we don't have as many overhead costs as maybe a larger firm would. We do have interest in having 2 small offices, both in Indianapolis and in Pittsburgh, in the short/medium term when we can, and long term. So it's something we're growing into, but as a young kind of scrappy startup, we were able to have a presence quickly in the places that we wanted to do work, because we were able to kind of start up quickly. And given the barriers to entry to starting a firm are a lot lower than they once were, especially with everything being digital, there's a real benefit to that. But of course, there's a downside to that, where we're not around a table sketching every day, and wanting to have some of that as part of the culture of our office moving forward is something that I think as designers we really loved working at Sasaki and want to carry forward today. And to the point of clients, Chris and I and everyone on our team now is constantly having conversations with people who might be allied professionals, architects, or urban designers and planners, but also just friends and family and professional colleagues. Building those relationships over time has been what has allowed us to get clients relatively early on in the formation of our business. Every client we have currently has come from a relationship that we've built over time. We go after RFPs and we do competition work here and there when it makes sense, but 90% of our work comes from relationships that we've built and maintained, and there are other human beings on the other side of the table who've hired us to do this work. And it might sound simple, but I think it's a good reminder to just be always even when you're in school or if you're an emerging professional, those relationships matter. And we were talking about this in Alexandra's class, that the relationships even in undergrad and grad school in our early stages of work at Sasaki have led to work that we're doing now, because people disperse and go other places and they become the client, or they know someone who knows someone who could potentially hire you or is interested in improving their community. And it's through those relationships that we have been able to get those clients early on.
Alex, you want me to take the next one?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, there's a question about phasing from Jai Chi, but I that came up with mine too. I thought what was interesting in your talk, and maybe you said it, but this idea that time is not just phasing. The idea that when you think of time, we tend to think about how do you phase it, or how does a project start to finish.
Yeah.
You said it's about testing, activation, and observation, which I think is a different way of thinking about how you phase projects, and like with the Birch Street one, right? And so
Yeah.
this one, it's like, can you talk more about the phasing process? The factors of how you decide the lengths, the depth of research, development, engagement, et cetera.
Yeah, I think for us, because we've now been working on enough projects where, in a typical lifespan of a landscape architect being involved in a project, we don't, there's the kind of classic phasing strategy that we do for our master plan, and then implement first phase, second phase, third phase, and then you leave. But we know the trend towards activation and continual kind of programming of spaces is something that just has emerged more and more, and is something that we've been able to go back and observe in the places, and then be able to continue making recommendations for things. But it's tricky because it's not in the typical scope for landscape architects. So I think we talk about it, and it's something that we're very aware of, and we're able to kind of learn from the past projects and bring to the next projects. And so I think where the challenge is now is how do we continue to stay involved in these places? And we do in many ways, but that's kind of our own personal interest or relationships that we've built with folks that we've stayed involved in. It's not necessarily like, paid work to do that. But I think it's something that you can add value in that way long-term. And it's also because we live in these places where we're doing the work, we're not jetting off to a million different spots all the time, that it allows us to be able to do that, which we find very important, one, for the longevity of those places, but also our own personal life. I think life goals and lifestyle that we want to have, where we can like see the improvements in the places that we live and work. Yeah.
Awesome. I think we have a few more questions. So Chenhao was wondering, I'm just going to kind of summarize the question, but what needs to be considered when designing for a temporary landscape, and kind of how that is different also than designing for a more permanent project?
Yeah, that's a good question. We were interviewing for another project with another firm that does more urban design work, and they also do a lot of like kind of testing stuff. And they were talking about how if you don't think strategically about your materials, there's a risk of creating urban trash, which I thought, or urban litter. It was urban litter, which I thought was good. And I think that can happen often with like, you know, parklet projects or more parking day things made out of lots of pallets and stuff. And even the duct tape for our project, we weren't, you know, the duct tape itself wasn't something we were able to do something with after the fact, but we are always trying to think about what is the afterlife of those materials. And the milk crates, as we were mentioning, they, we were able to, the city uses them after the fact they found space for storage, and I've used them for other pop-up events as seating. And so making sure that there's kind of a next stage for the projects. We also worked on a project in Pittsburgh to activate some of the city steps, which run up and down the hillsides in Pittsburgh, with a neighborhood. And we had been awarded kind of it was more of a public art grant to work with a neighborhood organization to create these vertical park furniture elements along the steps in a neighborhood called Polish Hill. And we could have very easily just created these things and then they would have been tossed out, or maybe people would have taken them or something, but we designed them intentionally to be used by the community organization after the activation event happened so that they could use them for the events that they host, like farmers markets or community meetings. And so we designed the pieces to be able to be used kind of post our involvement, but something that could have a life after the fact. And so that's one thing we think about. The other thing I would say is that even though it's just, you know, we say it's just duct tape, milk crates, it still takes a similar level of design rigor and research around materials and understanding what's available and cost and availability for delivery. That's like a big thing, because we were essentially acting as like quasi contractors with temporary materials, making sure everything got delivered on site on the right time, and making sure that it fit within the budget. And so those types of things, needing to do the kind of traditional drawings that landscape architects do from a construction standpoint, like a layout and materials plan to understand how much of all those materials we needed. So even though it's temporary, it's still something that requires that same kind of expertise as a landscape architect to implement.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple more minutes left, but a real quick pickup on that from Mung Ying was like, how do you deal during construction phase, or how do you deal with setbacks and, call an audible and just go somewhere else in your.
Well, I mean, for Birch Street, I had a family death and I had to leave like 4 hours before the whole street wrapped up. And I know Chris and you guys were like figuring out the dowels at the last minute. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally Birch Street or otherwise on any project, there are setbacks and audibles constantly when you get into construction. And I think knowing you're at a place that allows for flexibility, can kind of ensure success. But yeah, I mean, I know Nick and Terry are on this call, but I remember looking at things in real time with Nick and like deleting a planter and switching paving and kind of flipping things just based on our own kind of understanding in the real space. And so I think it's just, being intentional and thoughtful about kind of looking at things and knowing that you have to have the kind of flexibility to adapt when you do run into something underground that you didn't know was there, and being able to change.
Awesome. Maybe we have time for one more question. The last one. Let me see. So let me see if I understand Bowen's question. So as for each phases, things may change through time while the site is being developed. Is there any kind of design you did that needed a big change when pushing it forward? So maybe this is kind of jumping off of what you just said, Chris, in terms of having to be flexible and allow for those changes to happen.
Well, maybe to the point, I'm thinking about the Dunham project in Cleveland that we're working on, the master plan for the House Museum. You know, a part of our master planning work is doing kind of scenario-based planning. So, you know, what if there's an idea for a barn expansion as part of that project? What if it was here, here, or here? And what are those implications? And being able to talk through that with the client team, it kind of allows for us to have those conversations around if there's massive change at some point, what would the implications be, and ensuring that our design strategies have enough intention behind them that there's really a rationale as to why something is in its location, especially at a master planning scale. It's an important part of the conversations that we're facilitating to ensure that there's flexibility in a master plan. So if some major financial something or other shifts, or somebody from the board decides they don't want to do X, Y, and Z, that there's the ability to change and be flexible over time. And so for Dunham and for our other work, we're always kind of looking at those a variety of scenarios to talk through the pros and cons, and then ultimately kind of decide on the final vision of it, but knowing that it has the flexibility to change if needed. Yeah.
Great. Do you think that's good, Alex?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Someone else had to slip one in the last minute, but we'll table that one. So Alex, I just want to quickly say thank you so much. This has been great. I'm going to give it to Alex to bring it home, and we can move on.
Yeah, thank you, Nina and Chris, for joining us today. This was awesome. Even for me, who I'm very familiar with our own work, but it's always great to see and kind of zoom out and see, you know, what are we doing every day. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Really great questions and discussion. I also just want to thank Richard and our whole Sam Fox communications team, who has been instrumental in putting this series together. I'm going to thank you for each lecture that we have, because you guys have done a ton of work. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Stay tuned for next week. I think the same time next week, we'll have Alexa Von Brainerd join us for a conversation as well. Cool. Thanks everyone. Have a good Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Everybody.
That was great, Alex. Thanks, Richard.